Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having us out. I am the Director of Development and Communications at the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago, and you're going to hear from three of my colleagues and friends who are doing really, really incredible things in this world. So the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago is based on the 6 principles and steps of nonviolence that you see up by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The first person who's going to speak to you is Chris Patterson. He's the Director of Programs, and he's going to tell you a little bit about how we got started and what we're doing now throughout the city to reduce violence. And then we're going to show a short video that we've got queued up that will tell you a bigger picture of what we do. You'll get to hear from some of our participants, some of our board members, different people in the community we work with. And then you're going to hear from Kejuan Scott, who is a participant of the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago and has been for almost a year. Can I say what anniversary it is, or are you going to talk about that? You're going to talk about it? Okay. So Kejuan is doing some really, really inspiring and amazing things. And then Teny Gross, who is our Executive Director and founder of the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago, we'll talk to you about the work that we're doing citywide to help build this architecture that is really having a profound effect on the violence and reducing the violence citywide, so we can hopefully work on some of the other issues that we have that are underlying the violence. So thanks again, and I will let Chris take the mic.
All right. So I believe I'm queued up, or do I need to speak into this mic?
No, you're queued.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Patterson, Director of Programs again at the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. I come to this work through the lens of community organizing and years of outreach work centered around working with those who are at risk of either shooting someone or being shot. As we created the Institute about 3 years ago, going on a little over 3 years ago now, I think, right? We really wanted to be intentional about making sure that we learned a lot of lessons from outreach throughout the years, 30 years of outreach experience. So we were able to evaluate what went well, and we were really able to look at what we could do better in the outreach field. So there's a few things that I'll speak about in a couple minutes. So years ago, outreach workers would have to be the one-stop shop for participants in the community. It's a very hard thing for people to do, to be the be-all for people they're trying to help. In the past, an outreach worker would need to be an outreach worker, case manager, the community organizer, the victim advocate. And oftentimes they did a really good job, but they couldn't do all of them well. And so as we created the Institute for Nonviolence, we wanted to make sure that we sort of separated those spectrums and paid homage to the professionalism that goes into each one of those components. We know that victim advocates is a profession all in itself. We know that case management, but what we wanted to do across the spectrum was show that outreach workers were a professionalism that wasn't recognized but yet should be. And so when we created the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago, we wanted to make sure that there was an outreach worker that created relationships, established relationships with those who were at risk of shooting someone or being shot. That meant going into the community, establishing, again, those relationships, partnering with people in the community and helping them move from point A to point B. That was the idea. From that point, they would connect to a case manager, who is our second component in our second program. The program manager, alongside with the outreach worker, would then, work on trying to identify some of those goals that the participants would have, whether that be getting employment, getting back into school, mental health support, transportation, oftentimes substance abuse, addressing substance abuse, maybe connecting to family ties. And then there's a third component of our organization, victim advocates. To Teny, I know Teny will be able to speak to this point. We often have people who are shot or family members who have lost loved ones. And oftentimes navigating the process of paperwork, and this is an experience that unfortunately, hopefully a lot of us in this room don't have, but people sometimes do have. And it's a hard transition to try to figure that out while you're grieving. And so we want to be able to provide that support. We also want to be able to provide a support when people enter a hospital bed, that they see a loving, caring individual who will stand beside them and let them know that they're not alone, right? And oftentimes the hospital room and the emergency room in some of these trauma centers is a very lonely place. The fourth component is a community organizing component. The community organizing component was essential for us because we realized that, I would say, 99+% of the community wants to be involved in violence reduction. They just don't know how. And I would imagine that's a dilemma for people in this room. Everyone wants to be involved, but it's such a huge problem that it's hard as an individual to kind of like put your finger on how you can help as an individual. So the community organizing component from the Institute for Nonviolence wants to provide a vehicle in which, if you join with us and you partner with us, we'll provide a way that you can financially support, you can physically support, you can provide spiritual and support for those, spiritual and mental support for those people that we work with. So there's a cadre of ways in which you can get involved. We provide a nonviolence training, which is, I think, I'm on my 5th program component, right? So there's like 7 components. We're a really large organization. The nonviolence component was essential for us. What we saw is that we needed a foundation, right? And so when Teny came, he came with the idea of introducing some work that he's done in the East Coast, which you'll hear about, introducing the Kingian nonviolence, right? And so what we found out was, what I found out later, was that the 6 principles that we established ourselves on, which you'll see here, are the foundation in which we believe are rights of people in community, to establish the beloved community, to be courageous, some of those pieces that you can read. The 6 steps that you see to my right, to your left, are the ways in which we do those things, right? Gathering information and educating people, checking our commitments, right? And so there's a science almost to the work that we're doing. It's not by happenstance that there is some progressions and some successes in the work that we're doing. It's very, very intentional work. There was a piece that I talk about in one of the videos you may or may not see today, is that if each one of us were in the room to mediate a conflict, I think that we would all do that by our gut reaction and our life experiences. Some of us may be able to mediate it, some of us may not. What the nonviolent steps provides us is a blueprint that if we simply follow those 6 steps that we see, that we are confident, that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was confident, and if you follow those steps, then you can resolve conflicts, whether they're in the street, family, peer-to-peer, at work, right? And so we've tested it. It seems to work for us every single time. But we're human beings, and sometimes when we don't stick to the blueprint, we often find that we don't come up with the solution we wanted. And so we believe, combined with nonviolence and restorative justice and the public health approach, that we've kind of put our finger on what works, but collectively, right? And so nonviolence by itself doesn't fix everything. It's part of a whole, and we believe that it's a critical part of our work. The other program that we're privileged to have is the READI program, which I'm sure you'll hear about in a minute. We're partnered with Heartland Alliance, and what we've been able to see is a transitional jobs program that was missing all the time. We work with a lot of people who are missing a lot, right? And we have a lot of testimony for that. But one of those pieces is the employment piece. And to be able to provide an opportunity for people to see an out, right? See the light at the end of the tunnel as it pertains to employment. It was a huge, it's a great gift for the Institute for Nonviolence and our partners to be able to have that open up doors and opportunities for those we work with. So those are a few of the programs that we have. We have a video for you, and definitely want to suck up too much oxygen in the room, like leave some space for my folks to talk about. Because I can say some really cool things about the program that we work with, but I think the best person in the room to kind of really tell you what we're doing is Kejuan, and so in a moment I'm sure we'll get to him. But I'll hand it over to Tara, or we could start the video to show you a little bit about what we're doing.
What pulled me into this is having this concern that especially young black males, don't go through that same cycle that me and my peers went through. We done spent all our 20s behind the wall. I would hate for this young group to go through the same thing.
And because that cycle continues, they become the perpetrators of violence. But 9 times out of 10, it's because they had their own run-in with violence. They were victimized, so they end up victimizing others. I'm sure you've heard it. Hurting people hurt people.
I got shot in May, and then my mindset was so different from this, because this is my first time getting shot. This is my second time. So my mindset changed from the first to the second, because this time I knew retaliating was just gonna lead me to go to jail or dead.
I have not met anyone who said they want to be in prison or dead. And so, these guys, they want to get back in school, and they want jobs, they want security, they want to be loved. And so my only concern is that if there's not enough people or organizations ready to bring that, then they'll come up empty.
My brother got killed November 5th. I gotta be strong because I got 5 nieces and nephews. So it's I gotta be the example, be the hero instead of the villain.
Last year, I lost my little baby brother. So, instead of me promoting violence, no, I got you. I got something else. I can't get justice for him. I can't. So, but what I can do is promote nonviolent things to help other people not feel what I feel.
%80 of the team here, from the community, at one point was out and part of the madness, and at some point turned their life around.
It's really about investing in communities in a way that addresses harm and allows both people who feel victimized and people who have caused harm to heal.
When I pulled away from some of these shootings, and I knew that it was still hot, volatile, and could be a retaliatory shooting minutes after we leave, it brought me a little more comfort to know that when I pulled away and I looked in the rearview mirror, I seen those guys with the green shirts. I knew they were there trying to do the same thing I'm doing, but a different way.
You don't always gotta retaliate to get your point across.
We're trying to help with fix Chicago, bring our city back. That's what we're doing. That's the real reason for this program, real reason for Nonviolence Institute, trying to stop the violence and bring Chicago back to Chicago. And that's what I'm here for. I'm down with that. Because I was born and raised, I'm a Chicagoan. I don't like what's going on in my city at all.
In the next 5 years, I would love for the community impact to be so large that the community itself can impart nonviolence for those who are partaking in violence. That mothers feel comfortable enough going, outside their door to mediate a conflict between two young men, that they know from the block that we get to know each other, and that the Institute is responsible for the training and bringing together of like minds. So for me, it's a community coming together, making Chicago work.
My name is Kejuan Scott, and I came about, well, first of all, I'm gonna tell you something. Today is actually a blissful day for me, you know. I'm celebrating life, meaning this is the day I was shot a year ago, and I'm just happy to be alive, you know. I'm glad God has been a big part of my life, helping me out every step of the way. And I came involved at the Institute right after this date last year, you know. I met Teny in the neighborhood at a community meeting that they was hosting actually in our neighborhood, and he asked me some things, and I told him, like, this life, this isn't set up for me, you know, like what happened and the lifestyle that I was going down, the road I was living in, you know, it wasn't set up for me. This wasn't designed for me, you know. I was designed for something better, something greater than what I was living at, you know. And he took a liking to what I said, and he gave me his card. We exchanged information and everything. So from that day on, I kept in contact. I kept strong contact with Teny until the summer tournament came about. We host a basketball tournament every summer in our community. I'm from the Austin area, and the park is called Moore Park. If you ever get a chance to come out and check us out. That's when I met this guy. You know, this guy, you know, he put me in a position that it gave me that leadership skill. You know, it helped me to develop more and more leadership skills, and I ran with it, and I managed it, maintained it, got through. After that, he acknowledged and said, "Man, I like what you did. I like how you showed up and showed out for just a small period of time and a little amount of money. But it wasn't about the money that you were showing up for. It was about the development you wanted, the develop process you wanted." So I said, "Yeah, man, I'm really focused on work, man. I need to get back to work. You know, I've been crippled enough. I need to get back to work. You know, I need to keep my financial problems out, keep that at a minimum." So he said, "Okay, I got something for you. I'm gonna see we try the READI program for you." I said, I ran with it, followed through with it. To be exact, I am actually the president of the Participant Advisory Council. That's a big part of the program. I work relentlessly with outreach workers, case management, anyone around the nonviolence office that, you know, need my help, you know, about anything, whether it's about finding information on the guy or helping this person out with some type of uniform, if he got his boots, you know. But I play a big part in everything that goes on. The Institute play a big part in my life, actually, because I wouldn't be on this train, this train of thought I'm on now. I would never in a day think that I would be going this route. I think I'd still be out there pulling up on cats, you know what I mean? If pulling up on cats, I say, driving down and say, "Hey, what's up? Let's do this, let's do that." You know what I mean? All the negative. But working with the Institute right now, it got me on a whole positive level. Like, I don't even associate with half of the guys that I used to associate with, but if I do associate with those guys, I'm inflicting some positive lecture on them, something positive that's gonna make them change. If it ain't gonna make you change right now from this speak, then maybe a day or two later, a month later, a year or so, you gonna get it. It's gonna click, because I'm a living witness and living testimony, and I've been on the other end of the barrel numerous of times. Like that guy said in the video, you know, he got shot in May. I got shot in May. That wasn't his first time being shot, then my first time being shot or shot at. So, with that to be said, that was the last time, though. It most definitely was the last time. God is my witness. You know, I've been going to church. I've been doing mostly positive things. You know, this is my support system as well. You know, I don't even have a train of thought to even do anything negative. So it's like problem solving, brainstorming, whatever it takes to stay on a good track, a positive lifestyle, live that positive lifestyle, then that's what I'm all for it. I get kudos from the commander of the 15th district of our area, and you know, and that from that to be said, you know, I used to be on his bad side, you know, from to hear him to say that about me, it's like we actually greet each other and shake hands, and man, like he ready to take me out for dinner one day, you know. So with that being said, you know, I'm just glad to be a part of this, and I'm glad to be a part of change. You know, Obama said change is supposed to be come about, but I feel that the Institute is really part of the change in Chicago.
If I may. Okay.
You could have did it.
So I want to make sure I'm not detracting. Really, how do you add to what has been said? I'll try and talk a little bit. You know, the work really is described by both Chris and Kejuan. What they describe is it's about, we can go on whole sophisticated models, but at the end of the day, it's about relationships, dedication. And we're not doing any charity work. People did for Chris and for me what we are doing for Kejuan, right? And none of us is successful in life on our own. And at some point, our society forgot to take care of the next generation, was overwhelmed. You know, you mentioned racism, disinvestment. I think this week you just gave me an article which we saw, I think 45% African American West Side and South Side of young people. I think it's higher if it's if it's someone who didn't complete school without employment, and we see that. You know, personally, I'm an Israeli. On Thursday we had Holocaust Day, Holocaust Memorial Day. I lost my grandmother and her mother in Croatia, in Zagreb, to the Holocaust by people who collaborated with the Nazis. And I grew up, why are we so hated? And you internalize that. I'm also partially Christian, an Austrian Catholic and a Serbian Orthodox. So I got to think about from all sides of conflict. And as an Israeli, I got to grow up as a victim, but also as a perpetrator. Right? I'm not happy with how my country is dealing with the Palestinians. When we have power, many of us need to check ourselves. Any human being is corruptible by power. And that's how I got involved in 89, 90 in Boston during the crack epidemic in violence reduction through a Pentecostal church in Boston. After the Charles Stewart case, some of you might remember it, and Morning Star Baptist Church stabbing during a gang funeral. And I was recruited by a Catholic church in 2001 to start the Institute for Nonviolence in Providence, Rhode Island. I thought it was going to be a piece of cake, but it turns out it's the third poorest city in the country for children. It's a lot of immigrants, people who came from trauma, again, that we helped inflict in Laos and in Cambodia. And we, through this model that Chris described of collaboration and partnerships and pushing nonviolence, the year that I no longer ran the Institute, in 2016, was the first time that Providence had 0 gang homicide, the first time in its history. Now, Providence is not Chicago, but it is a very poor, tough city that is now, you can drive through places where before there would be 4 gangs on the same street and people would pull guns in front of you. And now you can drive with your children, and I think everyone is having a better life. There is work around the country, like happens now in Los Angeles as well as in New York, that we don't have to live in the levels of violence that we experience here in Chicago. Sometimes it's difficult when you watch the TV news to think that something can be done about that. It looks hopeless. But when people like me, there's a few of us nationally who work on this that really have accumulated a lot of time looking at law enforcement, looking at structures, and I'll talk in a minute about the structure we're building here in Chicago. I very much understand. I had relationships with Chicago since '99 when they spent a week with us in Boston to try and formulate what they're going to do. So a lot of us, it's a small world. We know each other in violence prevention. And unlike the general public, when you see the violence, you see, oh my God, these gang members are just monsters, right? And there's nothing that can be done about it. And maybe occasionally, if you're more sympathetic on the left, you think there's also a problem with the police. But in reality, you're facing a problem of really bad leadership and management, right? When you want to fix a city, here is a painful truth. You can reduce the violence without dealing with root causes. root causes are racism, poverty, in disinvestment in school and employment. Now, it won't last for long, so I want to be very clear about that, right? We can reduce and trip down the violence. It doesn't allow society, it shouldn't allow society not to deal with the root causes, but we need to bring the heat down, and that's what we're trying to do in Chicago, and we're hoping when the temperature of violence and the numbers of violence go down, people can really now focus on what will be better schools, better investment, and I think at some point a reparation and reconciliation. This society will need it. This is our original problem that we created, and it won't go away. Just like for us Israelis with the Palestinians, unless we deal with it in a full and just way, we will never get justice. It will never be peace. Same goes for America. Unless we deal with what we've dealt with Native Americans and African Americans. And that goes to people who look like me, right, in this society. We're the ones who created it, and we need to own it. So that's why what we do is, this is not charity work, it's restoring some sort of semblance of justice, but for someone like me who gets to travel in both well, the torture and the pain and lack of opportunity that people experience in the neighborhood, it saddens me every day. Yet watching the videos, listening to Chris, working with Chris, listening to Kejuan, inspires me to no end. I probably cannot do anything less inspiring than that will keep me from deep depression, because I know how in general we're dealing, and we're lacking in really will to do that. So when I was asked 3 years ago to come to Chicago, it was with the idea that we will start restoring, supporting and building on some of the work that Outreach already did here in this city, but we knew we needed to build bridges to law enforcement, but also force change in law enforcement. So the Institute is built, and this is not the Institute, I'll get to that in a second. The Institute, the way Chris described it, we have our own ability to gather intelligence and act on it. We know who is in conflict with who, we build relationships. So if we have a very hostile law enforcement to us, we can still operate. We don't need them. Now we have an interest, as all of us I think should, that the government become legitimate again. If you're looking for your next book to read, I would recommend Ghetto Side, the word ghetto and side, about South Central LA, by Jill Leovy. And she describes why 90% of homicides in Chicago are African American. You can do what a lot of us, people who look like me, would conclude, that they're just different and they're killing each other at higher rates. And some people do that, let's be honest. Or you can really look at the reasons, and one of the main reasons in her argument is, I never get justice from you. Our government is not legitimate for African Americans, so I'm going to have to force somehow structure to survive in my neighborhood. And to fix that, we cannot just do the outreach and the employment. We need to push our government to take its responsibility that everyone who is a taxpayer should get the same level of services, the same justice. So they won't have to supply it for themselves. So we are building a system where now Austin, we chose to start in Austin, which was by twice the rate, the most violent neighborhood in Chicago, twice the rate of incarceration and reentry than the next neighborhood in Chicago. And now in the last 2 years, we have a 68% reduction in shooting in our area. It leads the city in reduction. It sounds better than reality is. I never celebrate numbers, right? Chris and his team have brought together 9 groups that since last July have been meeting every other week or so and really communicating among themselves. Again, like Chris said in the video, I think, people want peace. They don't want to be shot at, they don't want to shoot. So they've been doing a lot of their self-maintenance. There's 2 groups that haven't yet accepted, and we're now focusing on them. We're expanding north, right? But the numbers also are good. We have a great commander, Commander Cato, right, who is really going to be a superstar in this department, a great leader. He created a job fair in the most busy drug corner in his district by bringing Amazon and FedEx with laptops to offer jobs. You can be creative. We in the government and we nonprofits can be creative. He just wants us to be successful. He really cares about life. He was open to change his mind about Kejuan, right? And that's when we need forgiveness, we need love, and we need some skills and bringing people opportunities. Cannot be just empty words like love. And I'll stop with just describing what we're building in Chicago. So in Chicago, what you see is there's now an Office of Violence Prevention for the city. It's really not funded yet the way it should be. It's modeled after LA and New York, where they have anywhere between 30 or 60 staff. And again, you cannot get solutions for the cheap. So the danger is, now there's legislation, there's that office, if it's not going to be fully funded, because, you know, we have a pension thing to close and other things, there's always going to be other emergencies on our budgets. And that's where we liberals fail. Yes, we care about you people who get shot. Yes, it's so terrible. However, at the moment, we cannot do anything because we got a deficit. We got to get over that. We got to invest in this part. This is a preventable problem. Underneath them, you have Arnie Duncan with CRED, Chicago CRED. They helped create, this city did not have a coordinating body. They talked every other week about what's going on in the city around violence, opportunities, what do we need to do, where resources are needed, where do we need more outreach workers. So that now happens in a table, round table in Chicago. And then you have CP4P, Communities Partnering for Peace. It's under Metropolitan Family Services, something the Institute helped create. Again, we did not want to have a victorious, arrogant model, that our model is the best and it should run the whole city. We reached out, and Chris was instrumental there as well as others. What are the other groups who do similar work? Can we work together and make decisions together as a collaborative? So we chose 9 neighborhoods from Englewood to Austin where 50% of the homicides happen. And we had a continuum, right? And we built a partnership. That partnership can expand. But first we wanted to tackle, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we wanted to start somewhere. And we said, let's take where 50% of the homicides happen. And you see that little sliver on the right. Actually, you gave me that beautiful tool, right? Where do I press? Is that now? I'm so technology challenged. Anyway. You know how to press it? So there's a sliver there, it's our academy. So we brought from Los Angeles an academy to professionalize outreach workers. It's 144 hours. And Chris is one of the instructors, is one of the people who helped build the curriculum.
It's the red.
It's the red? Thank you. So this is the academy. Over here, there's police accountability. So technically that's going to be done by the monitor and professionals, only the police, but we actually insert ourselves right here. We affect good leaders in the police, and we affect how they change and support them so people follow them, right? Because we have our clout, we help influence the numbers of a commander, so they're interested in complying somewhat with our behavior and being much more softer on the community. You can be tough on the people you charge, but it's got to be empathy and understanding and retooling. And we have now about 7 commanders that are really getting it, right? The commander level, which is district commanders. And we're now trickling it. People from their different commander coming to our academy, and the bridges are now starting to be built. So change won't happen just by a consent decree, though it's very important. It won't happen just by a monitor. It needs to happen also through human interaction. There's a lot of young officers who want a different opportunity. Do you need to say something, Chris? Mm-hmm. Then we have READI Chicago. Again, we're part of that as well with Heartland, and that's based on 18 months, with Kejuan is in it, paid, as well as cognitive behavior therapy, right? So how you deal with your emotions, what do I process, etc. How do I get mentored? How do I get opportunity? Levels of trauma here are quite incredible in our city, right? I always say it is safer to be an Israeli soldier leaving Lebanon than it is to be someone like Kejuan in Austin. That is insane in my opinion, but it's in our democracy. That is the truth. I had a much better chance to survive as a sergeant in the Israeli army. And I'm missing Q Violence, that's technical. They were kind of pioneers in the city. Now they help us with technical support. So those are the components, and there's one more component, FLIP. So FLIP is an interesting component. It started by Jalen, who works for Chicago CRED. And the idea is ambassadors. Not everyone, transitions take time, right? I know it because I was already 20 pounds lighter, and now I'm back 20 pounds. You don't just kind of get an idea and you implement it and it works well for you. So the flip allows us, in Austin we have 8 hotspots where really a lot of conflicts happen. In West Garfield we have 8 hotspots. Then our partners in Englewood, we're allowed to then from Memorial Day to Labor Day to hire young people who don't need to live the life they're living if they're selling drugs or anything to survive. All we're asking them to do is on the shift that you're on, make sure when the young people you're around want to retaliate, want to engage in violence, that you just calm things down. You don't have yet a lot of skills. We don't want you to go and mediate with your rivals, none of that. Just on your corner, keep it down. Last summer we experimented that in Austin, and when they were on, there was 60% reduction in shootings. Again, we often think of models and things, but we don't involve the people who are actually involved in this and are in the conflicts, right? And that is so important. What I think is starting to happen now in Chicago, that the funding starts to trickle down where it's the most important. Finally, I'll close. Yesterday, I went to a press conference on the South Side where the marijuana, I'm going to mess up how we say that, right? But the bill of, it was really beautiful to see African-American legislators and white legislators, mainly women, working together. There was a sense of finally, we're not just going to do it and create legalization so that big corporations can win. They actually created a system where local people who were, this was really about the war on drugs, which really incarcerate African American and Latinos in much larger proportion. This is the chance to actually create some opportunities of entrepreneurship, wipe out potentially 800,000 charges, records. Or think about it, just in Illinois, 800,000 people have charges of marijuana that stop them from getting jobs, from getting Pell Grant loans, from education. It's a really odd, I studied Adam Smith at Harvard. I don't understand economics when you exclude people from competition. How is that a competitive model? How is that capitalism? Is beyond me. But you put on people stickers that they cannot work and they can, so now that's going to change. We're hoping that this model, which includes many more people than the Institute, everything we say here is not advocating for the Institute, is advocating for partnerships that will need investment. There's a campaign called Invest Now, Invest. You can look it on the web. Chicago Cred helped create that. That is requesting $150 million a year, 50 from the state, 50 from the city, and 50 from Cook County, to really build violence reduction. The cost of violence, if you stand, sometimes I have a meeting on the 43rd floor of Chase Bank, downtown, and I look south and west, I see the very simple results. I don't need a lot of studies of violence. Women not running in parks, people are not opening restaurants, things don't develop. In fact, the Tribune in 2010 did this 50-year anniversary story on Martin Luther King, where the same blocks that were empty in '68 are still empty. We're all suffering for that. So let's have a more progressive, where everyone wins. It's a no-brainer, less punitive, a model where we love each other and we create opportunities. And here's another thing, and I'll close with that. People said to me, Teny, this nonviolence and love your neighbor and all that thing worked on the East Coast. Ain't going to happen here. The police are too corrupt. The gang women are too tough. It's too far gone. It ain't going to happen. After 3 years, I can say the young people respond to love the same way they respond on the East Coast. It's a weird thing, but they do. They're loving and warm, and they love opportunities, and they're smart. And it really is a more efficient way to run and live together. So I'll stop here, because I know you want maybe
I know that they will entertain questions. And there's one in the back. Ori?
Yeah, you know me, I'm a lawyer, I talk all the time. I want to applaud you for what you're doing. Native born Chicago, grew up in Englewood. Also knew David Barksdale, the Disciples, and Chef Ford, I can go back. Also, just so before I ask the question, so you know where it's coming from, not only am I a Southside girl, and the Southside is different. Englewood is very different from Austin, or what's left of Englewood. I was also appointed to the police board by Harold Washington and worked under Fred Rice. That to say, Fred Rice made us, and I was with Sister Ida Gannon and Norma Morris and some very much more smarter people than I was. Fred Rice would take us to the police academy. In fact, told us as police board members we had to go see the training that the police were having. And he said then that there is only a one-time, I can't do the statistics, that when a police officer needs to shoot to kill. That he then wanted police people, and women were just some steps older and were just joining the force, to train to shoot in the knee, to shoot in the feet, to shoot in the arm, and to get more credit for that than to shoot to kill. I say all that to say FOP threatened to sue him. When Fred Rice put them on bikes, police officers were not on bikes, primarily because he said, he's seeing you on bikes rather than a car, whether it's like, I get to know you, I get to talk to you, I get to know your name. FOP threatened to sue him. Fred, being smart and much nicer than, I was also with Nancy Jefferson, Midwest Community, he said, well, they're overweight, this will help them stay in shape. So FOP pulled that back. I'm saying that to say, and again, this is as far as leaving town, I've lived up here 23 years, so I mean, from Southside. The structure that was there when Harold Washington 1,000 years ago became mayor, and let me just add this, and we had public meetings, and there was a woman, Mount Greenwood, far south side of Chicago, came and brought a letter that was being put under the doors in Mount Greenwood from police officers saying, you need to move, you have to move. You got an N-word mayor, you have an N-word superintendent, and the N's are coming after you. Now, Nancy Jefferson and I were ready to just, and Fred Rice, to his credit, being the stellar kind of person you're talking about, said, please, I am the superintendent of all of Chicago. I will protect all of Chicago. Please give me this letter. If they come to your house, or if you receive any threats from anyone, call my deputy. He gave the deputy's number there and said, we are here to serve and protect. The other thing he said, and I have not heard it repeated by anybody, you cannot protect and serve a community, you cannot serve and protect a community that does not trust and respect you, and vice versa. And Fred, because he started as a commander, he created the first protocol for battered women, and don't let me start. But all that to say, all of that reform, when Harold died and Fred came off that board, I bet you can't even find some of that. I have some history here. Structurally, and I say this with 2 degrees in criminal justice, structurally, if you don't change the structure, the names of the great superintendents, and I think Fred Rice was one, the names of the great aldermen who also, and participated in, doesn't matter. So I hope what you engage in as I look at this, and particularly now that there's an opportunity with a new mayor, herstory as I call it, make some more herstory, that you push for structure. Because if you don't, and I said this to Kwame, look, I ain't never a time bragging, so I kind of 5 degrees, and Nancy knows 5 degrees separation between me and Obama, because the shell and it don't matter. All of that is irrelevant if you don't get the structure in place, because as soon as you pull away, back to deja vu all over again. So I'm hoping, and you talked about all of this, and I think this is a good sign of that, but I hope what you push for is structural change that cannot be reduced or eliminated based on political change. Because that's what I have lived through and experienced.
If I can address there was a couple points. I live on 79th Street, so I'm South-sided too. But we're also, one thing I failed to mention, we're also in 3 neighborhoods throughout the city of Chicago in partnerships with 9 other communities in the city. The 3 communities in which we're in is Austin, West Garfield Park, and Back of the Yards, which butts against Inglewood. We partner with the Inglewood sites, the Roseland sites, the Little Village, Humboldt Park, right? We're a little bit everywhere. But one of the things that, there's an ambition, and we've currently been working with law enforcement. We have a Metropolitan Peace Academy, which is a training academy that professionalizes outreach. For the first time ever, what we've been doing is we've been sitting with law enforcement who actually participates in the training. And I do think there's a culture that's changing within Chicago Police Department that we're supporting and advocating for. But for the first time, we're talking to those law enforcement folks and people in the training academy that we're entertaining the idea of actually providing a training for law enforcement and new recruits as they come into the system, right? And so I agree. again, coming from that community organizing component, I firmly believe in the idea that if we don't address the root cause, right, we'll find ourselves having the same conversation in a few years. So I think that we're looking forward to that change, right, and we're kind of like chipping away, but it's an old system. As it wasn't created just overnight, it won't take overnight to fix it. But I think we got the right people at the table, the right initiatives, the right momentum is there to actually do it and get it done. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
If I can add to that, Commander Cato is so good that I asked him, please stay till the end of the year, because he's going to be promoted. The same thing looking at Boston and Providence, none of this happened overnight. So Boston was 12 years, Providence was 16, and my person now, the team continues the work to the point that the chief of police there is on the board of the institute in Providence, right? He's on the board. And one of the things we're looking at is, and with Cato, it's got to be long enough that the DNA changes. So Cato now collects around him sergeants, lieutenants, and captains. He's teaching this new way of policing. And I think what tragically happened when Mayor Washington, I actually want to hear more, I want to learn more about White, because it sounds like he was ahead of his time. Or actually, what I always feel, we're not discovering anything new. We're going back to what's proper and right. And so I never heard of his name, and I definitely, as an aficionado of that kind of history, it's in our field. I want to learn more about him. But we really believe, and we're trying to push funders, this is not a quick fix and you look at the numbers and we're out. This is really changing the DNA. And it does happen partially through structure, but partially through relationships and seeing results and encouraging leaders within the department. Because quite honestly, who wants to come to work and be hated every day for 8 hours? But I also do think that nonviolence calls upon us that when we get our act around violence a little bit stronger, I want us to bring our trainers in nonviolence to Mount Greenwood and the neighborhood where officers and firefighters live. People often are trapped out of fear in hating other people. I'm not Pollyanna, I'm not a dreamer only, but I also know there's goodness in all of us. I don't want to stereotype everyone in all of us. And we need, just like now we're building bridges through the department, I think we also need to build with all the civilians in the city and talk honestly and frankly.
Any relationships with schools in these areas, Humboldt Park, etc.?
Yeah, so in the south side, on the back of the yards, we have relationships. So we're intentionally establishing relationships in which one of the principles you'll see here is building the beloved community, right? And so we don't believe as an outreach component that we can do it on our own. The schools are a critical component for that. So in Libby and Sherman schools, say in the back of the yards, we've got relationships, right? And so it's at to the point where if there's a conflict within that school, the principal will call the outreach supervisor and their teams go sort of mediate the conflict, but we're thinking steps ahead also, right? So we want to mediate those conflicts, but we also want to provide training and other support to the school. We actually have 2 outreach staff in our high school, Austin Career College Academy, that's in the Austin community. We have 2 paid staff inside the school working with the principal alongside, continuously putting out small fires that happen with the students so that they don't become participants of street outreach, if that makes sense. Inside the school, we service 40 students who are at risk of maybe dropping out of school, gang involvement, and all the other components that add to it. So yes, the school component is critical for us. We believe, while we're not necessarily a prevention organization because we work with people who are actually involved in gun and gang violence, where we can provide a prevention component, we will, and we support that. Yep.
Can you discuss the means of financial support for the organization? Obviously, you're presenting to me a program, and I'm very impressed with it, but everything costs money, and I don't know who's paying for all of this.
Hopefully, meaning the taxpayers will eventually. At the moment, so initially I was brought in by staff of the mayor as well as Gigi Pritzker to start a small pilot. But a month after I landed here, the Laquan McDonald video was released and pandemonium happened. And Police withdrew stops by 90%, and 2016 saw a 50% increase in homicide, which almost accounted for a good amount of the homicide rise in the United States, right? This city has a lot of impact. So we had to really, before we even could build our own nonviolent culture and our own organization, we actually reached out to partners we knew, and we built a collaboration. So you didn't go, you sometimes have to improvise with circumstances. They're not waiting for you to just build your own boutique, right? The 2016 also forced dialogue, so the Crime Lab and others, we pushed the dialogue that actually foundations took then, we got to do something. We don't see leadership anywhere else. At the moment it stands to what I think is now 45 foundations, but it's co-chaired by Joyce and MacArthur Foundation. The Pritzkers are involved. However, what they tell us, it is we cannot sustain it over 3 years or something like that. So I beg them, and I think when my colleagues, you cannot pull out of it. It cannot just be funded by the government, because there's a chance there for cronyism and so not enough of flexible imagination. We need foundations to remain in it. I also kind of teasingly like to say, as far as I know, in 150 years existence of the Art Institute, of which I'm a member, I don't think private foundation ever stopped funding the Art Institute. Why is it that the livelihood and safety of the citizens of our city, we should stop either? I'm all for the government going in, but it needs to be a mix, a blend. One of the biggest differences Chicago has than other cities with outreach is ceasefire was defunded every summer while Springfield was debating the budget. It's cruel, it's disrespectful. You're taking people with trauma, some of them have criminal records, and then when they're needed the most and their loyalties to the neighborhood is asked the most, you lay them off. Some got rearrested by trying to survive whatever way they could. It was a really bad system. If one thing I have responsibility, and my colleagues on the big structure, is to provide stability for the people who are risking every day their lives in bringing peace to our city. We gotta have our priorities set. So the government needs to be involved, meaning us, the taxpayers. And again, there's 3 buildings at the moment in Chicago that are being built that are each cost $1 billion. So this is not a poor city. This is not Milwaukee. This is not St. Louis, no disrespect. This is a world-class city, and we need to act like that. So at the moment, the funding comes through 45 foundations, and they fund those biggest structures like Heartland Alliance, MFS, that then trickle it out to us and our partners. I hope that helps.
Can I make a comment? And my name is Sarah Knijnik. I'm the organizer of the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition. And I just want to follow up on what Teny just said. There are 2 bills right now under consideration in the Illinois General Assembly that would lead to funding streams for organizations like Institute for Nonviolence. If there's anyone here who would like information about how to support those efforts, if you could please let me know, I'd appreciate it. I've got cards, so thank you.
You spoke about your work in Providence and how in 2016 there was no homicides. You also spoke that in order to kind of get to the root of all of this, you have to cool things down. And so I'm wondering, I guess, we're talking about Chicago, but if you look back now at Providence, are they able to tackle some of, are they able to invest now? Because you said that was disinvestment in racism. Are you seeing a change now because things have cooled down?
I think it's a mixed review. Same with Boston, right? There's also a negative effect to reducing violence, which is gentrification. And that's why we cannot get around having a real reconciliation in our society and an apology and I think I'm losing now the word, reparation, right? Because I wrote an editorial in the Boston Globe in 2001 that said, I feel I betrayed the young people I worked with, because I and other outreach workers asked, please put down your guns. But then when gentrification was really vicious in Boston, I mean, we were getting evicted left and right, people told me, Teny, don't be Don Quixote, this is market forces. So in the editorial, I quoted a real estate agent telling me, Teny, please calm this neighborhood down, I'm dying to show it. And I can tell you, and what my argument was in that editorial is still good 25 years later, is it wasn't market forces that brought the violence down. It was taxpayers paid police, taxpayers through grants, federal grants, paid outreach workers and clergy that brought the violence down. Real estate didn't bring the violence down. But so, and at some point again, it's uncomfortable to say that, but white people need to look into our conscience. Why is it we don't want to live with black people? We cannot have the solution that now the neighborhood is. So what I wrote there is the best guarantee of affordable housing is a violent drug dealer. Right? That is the best guarantor, because then we don't encroach on the neighborhood. And we need to be honest with ourselves. We can't keep pushing people around and just wanting, so we have some work to do ahead of us. Unfortunately, life is short. I'm working really hard to just understand my field, and I'm not that good at that. So I can maybe work with a large team of people to reduce the violence, but there's got to be a wave of organizers, and Chris is a natural organizer, that people won't be gentrified. The people who went through the bad years should enjoy the good years. You know, there's mechanisms, there are financial mechanisms to do that. It's in the interest of all of us. We are never going to rest unless we create injustice. So it's a dilemma, but we cannot stop trying to save young people from being shot. But there's an effect when it gets too calm, there's economic pressures, and the poor in a way never win, and we need to change that.
I want to say, just to add, Providence and Chicago are almost exact opposites to me, because the racial segregation and discrimination in housing in Chicago surpasses, I used to run the Fair Housing Mediation, it surpasses Providence by light years. And the fact that we're talking the South Side and the West Side is because they are predominantly African American and people of color. Yeah. And we're not talking the North Side, and we're not talking, Roscoe Village, and we're not talking Central Ravenswood, or whatever it's called today. Because I remind people, Dr. King came to Chicago for a reason, and it wasn't the weather. The issue there is, and it was racial segregation in housing on the West Side. And so we need to understand structurally how all of that led to some of where we are now. That what we're talking about, if you did the demographics and you know this, you're going to be talking to two prominent communities of color, predominantly African American. And so we need to keep all that as we think through the future and the progress. We have to also, and the fact that if you have if you get a record, until Cook County just passed, you couldn't get housing. They could keep you from being able to rent an apartment if you had a record, and thank God Tony just changed it. So it's structurally a lot of things that have to be done in addition to working with the people. That again, just in terms of Providence, because I get it. I'm Chicago. When they start comparing Chicago to other places that don't have some of that history, we just kind of understand why it's different here, and why it takes more of what you're doing, a comprehensive strategy than other places.
You said you do some work with Humboldt Park. Are you familiar with an organization called the Center for Changing Lives?
I'm not. One of our closest allies in Humboldt Park is an organization called ALSO, A-L-S-O. Located in there, so they do a lot of the outreach components that happen in the Humboldt Park area.
It's an organization that I and a bunch of friends support, and I just wonder, and it was originally in the Humboldt Park area. I just still
connect us.
It's primarily what their projects are right now are providing a lot of education for people so that they will move from homelessness to housing.
That's good.
Well, first, thanks for being here, and I appreciate what you guys are doing.
Right back at you.
I'm interested and always have been in racism in America, and just visited Montgomery this summer, the U.S. Peace and Justice Memorial. Is that the right term?
Montgomery.
Right name? Yeah. In Alabama. Yep. And I'm curious to know, understanding that the answers they're probably going to be about 1,000 different things. For white people in the suburbs who, you know, even I have an interest in racism. I have more knowledge than probably some of my counterparts in the suburbs, white suburban moms. What can we do? The people who even have an interest feel overwhelmed, or a sympathy, or a trying to, an acknowledgement. They have the acknowledgement that racism is a root cause of this problem, but they still don't know what to do. So not only, you know, white suburban moms, but you know, local governments who are not in Chicago.
So I'll tell you a few of the ways you could get involved with us. And I feel like at the root of a lot of the work we're doing is fighting back against racism. And part of that work is bringing people to Austin or to West Garfield Park to come out and interact with our participants, with our staff, with us, to do things like learn about the steps and principles of nonviolence. I just did a training Sunday with 2 of my coworkers to a group from a synagogue on the north side. They were all white folks, and they came out and really learned about some of the experiences. So one of the men I trained with was incarcerated for a long period of time, worked with Ceasefire, is now really changing his life, right? He talks about being locked up 32 times. Maybe he was a really bad criminal because he kept going back in, and he's now doing a clemency process. So just for people to learn about some of the things that people have to go through because the system is so racist and has systematically, as you were saying, really built these barriers. I hope everybody will read A New Jim Crow after this as well, which talks some about that. But I think, so having people come out, we can do like an hour or 2 hour thing, and then we have people create, they call them blessing bags, you can call them whatever you like, which is toiletries, socks, underwear, t-shirts, because a lot of the young men that we work with, and women, are not permanently housed. And if you're couch surfing, it's really nice to have a bag you can put your toothbrush in and your soap, and to have a clean pair of socks to put on. And we've already used several of those with our participants, and this happened a week ago, right? So those are things that you can do. You can host house parties at your house and bring out some of my coworkers or whomever to discuss the work that we're doing and how racism has impacted the society we're in. You can do that as a fundraiser. I'm the director of development, I have to throw that part in. But we also are fine with wine being involved. And you can do several other things to volunteer with us. So some people donate on a regular basis, like a monthly basis. Some people will come out and provide different types of programming. So tutoring, we're starting a GED program for several of our young men. So if people have a particular talent, so I have a science and math teacher who's going to come out and tutor around passing the math part of the GED. So there are a lot of different things and different ways that people can get involved. I'm happy to have that conversation one-on-one as well. If there's something that you have particular interest in, we can certainly talk about that too.
Perfect, thank you.
One question.
Go ahead, Eleanor.
On the subject reconciliation, you know, vengeance, a need for vengeance is a powerful factor. When you're reconciling, you have to give up that need, yes? Mm-hmm. How do you help people not try to get even? Or every time I hear a judge saying, you know, a death sentence and people cheer, how can you cheer when a life is going to be taken? Can you just talk a little bit about what does reconciliation look like and getting there?
So one of the principles you'll see to my left is accept suffering without retaliation for the sake of the just cause. And it's not just something that, you know, sounds good or that we kind of like hitched ourselves on to. It's one of the ideas that we've learned that we can't compromise. I would say 80+% of our staff at the Institute for Nonviolence are people who have been involved in the cycle of violence themselves. And so there's a lot of years, probably hundreds and hundreds of years of violence that staff have gone through, and they can provide a first-hand testimony. And so they've got the relationships with the people we're working with to the degree that when violence does happen, it's easy for me being in a cycle of violence. I lost both my brothers. I've been shot myself. I've been maybe a participant of all levels of involvement before someone saved my life. To talk to someone who's involved in the cycle of violence and talk them down from not necessarily from a standpoint of an idea of why we shouldn't, but firsthand experience of why violence doesn't work. To be able to say, yes, I lost my brother, but I can't bring him back. There was a piece on the video that we saw where a young man said he lost his younger brother earlier that year. And prior to maybe meeting the Institute or people like outreach workers who work at the Institute, he may have entertained the idea of retaliation. But after you kind of iron home, I think there's a seed planted in each individual where we know the right thing to do. We just need support and reinforcement of that. And really, I think what I found a lot of times is somebody wants someone else to tell them it's okay not to do it, right? Again, there was a part in here, again, I think the videos are really capturing video because it says, I've talked to a lot of young men and women over the years, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands, and I've not met one person that really wants to go to jail. And it's, but they end up in jail, right? Because of, sometimes it's just the idea no one was in their ear. No one really told them they loved them. No one kind of pulled them to the side. One of the things that I was thinking about as we're talking about this is that Kejuan told you that a year ago today he was shot in his hand. He was attending the funeral of a friend. My question, the larger question, and maybe we can all ask Kejuan, is why didn't you want to retaliate, right? Or did you, and what happened? And then we can, that really give us a more introspect.
I wanted to retaliate so bad, you know. Me being the type of cat I am, you know, I ain't had that much time to talk, so I couldn't let you guys know a lot about me. So me being the type of cat that I am, the street level, the high ranking level I was in the streets, it's like I had to retaliate. I needed retaliation. Or if I didn't get retaliation, it was wreak havoc on whoever else I can get my hands on. But what called me was God and my children, my 6 children. I'm also married. This happened a day after my anniversary. I got married May 4th, 2015. And yesterday was my 4th year anniversary, and today it's this anniversary. But the means of retaliation is like, I wanted it so bad, it's just like, I just said, when I laid in that hospital bed, it was like, nah. It's either you go after the gun or you put it down. I put it down because I got 6 lives that's looking after me. You know, they looking up to me, and they want me to be around. They don't need me to be behind jail, no bars, or laid up in a casket on the ground and nothing like that. They need me air in my body, breathing, working with my limbs, every one of them doing things for them the way they're supposed to be. So with that thought process right there, that the loving and caring of that, it hindered me, it slowed me down from the retaliation part. So that's like, I'll say not to retaliate, you just gotta find something to cope with. And the Institute, they help people cope a lot with a lot of things that, you might find something like reading, you might find reading very interesting to cope with, besides picking up that gun and go retaliate. You should pick your book up and go read a couple lessons and stuff like that. And maybe when you finish reading your lessons, you'll be all right now. You know what I mean? You won't be as hostile to what happened to you or to the next living human being. You know what I mean? So it's like, as I said in my mind, guns was made to hunt animals, not humans. So my retaliation level, it dropped. Like, retaliation for me, it isn't even a word. Because me being a human being, looking at the next human being, I see nothing but love and care. So therefore, I don't need to retaliate.